to tell them about. I'm gonna remind them about the webinar. My plan was to try to have some period where I'm essentially asking, what is the support? As I plan the project for next year, as we plan it, what does follow-up support look like? What would be helpful to do in order to keep them on the path? So just to ask that question. And then I want to have a conversation about, at least about shame and maybe about grievance. So I have a clip of, a 3-minute clip of, from a meeting where somebody's talking about the role of shame. I was going to screen share and share that, and then just have a conversation about whether the degree to which people thought that was relevant, and how should we better think about the role that shame can play in what allies do and don't do. So that's the shame conversation. But also, and I don't think I have time for it, I also think that I don't have time to find a clip. But I think that a whole bunch of what's going on is a whole bunch of this grievance that white people have is around grief, because they're anticipating a loss of their power, cultural and political status, and that part of what we're seeing is grief around that.
Okay.
And part of what I want to have a discussion about is the degree to which, like, what are some access points that allies might use to help move that conversation forward with skeptics. And it's probably going to start with getting in touch with their own grief, but I'm not sure. But that I want to have that conversation about those two issues, shame and about grief. I don't have a good tee up for the grief conversation, but I do. But I can talk about it, and I don't like what I just did. So those are the goals of the meeting. Each meeting. And just to let you know, Ngozi is also a professional facilitator, and she's one of the, if I have any thought partners behind this project, Ngozi is it. So she's been involved. Oh, yeah, look, she's flexing, as is the cat. So, so if the purpose of this meeting for other people is to touch base with participants, to talk about tell them some accomplishments that the project has, get some feedback from people who might have tried these techniques, and then have a conversation about issues of shame as affecting allies, and grief and grievance as affects skeptics. So that's the purpose of the meeting, but we might depend on what happens here. So Ingrid.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey there.
Okay. Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Sorry, Zoom is new to me. It took me a little while to figure out how to get here.
Okay, got it. That's useful to know that it's not straightforward. Are you?
Well, I think it is. I just wasn't prepared to download an app. I didn't realize I would need to do that.
There's a button where you can, I think on the lower left, where you can engage the camera or not. So if you're not purposefully invisible, then think about whether that camera button, whether you can press that if you want to be visible.
Okay. Do you have a preference? I prefer to be invisible, but if you would rather see me, I will do that. I don't want to be antisocial. Let me button my pants up.
Well, you just position the camera. I'm not wearing pants, but I position the camera so
better.
That just took a turn. All right.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, no problem. So thank you. You can
Sorry, that was a little too much truth, huh?
No, that was fine. That was fine. I actually am wearing pants, by the way. You do not have to be visible if you don't want to, although you may be calling that. So what workshop were you in, Ingrid?
Okay.
Which one were you in, Ingrid? Where did you attend the session?
I'm in Vancouver, Washington. Okay,
you just did it last week. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, basically what I did was I invited anybody who's attended any of these all year. So that's why I asked that question.
Okay.
Okay, great. So Robin, who is on the phone, not visible, also attended last week in Vancouver.
Hi, Robin.
Hello, I'm multitasking, which is why I'm not on camera. But
That's no problem. And then Gozai, who is the other person, is a thought partner on the project.
Hi.
Okay. So so there's always a dilemma about when you get started because not many people are going to show up. But so I really appreciate you both, Robin and Ingrid, joining. And I guess what I wanted to one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to update y'all about the course of the project, but again, y'all just heard from me last week, so that is less relevant for y'all. I want to I wanted to get a sense of whether or not, even in this week, whether any of the techniques or strategies that the project was promoting, you've actually tried them. We've gotten great feedback on the workshops, but it's hard. We have not yet gotten, and ultimately, if the project's going to really grow, we have to figure out ways to get that feedback, and this might be a mechanism for that. And I also was hoping that we might have a conversation about shame, and a conversation about the shame as far as it affects allies, and grief and grievance as far as it affects skeptics that you're working with. Okay, so as I was saying before you on, Angela, one of the things I'm trying to move this project toward is to get more feedback about what actually happens in the real world of trying to use these strategies. So let's talk about that first. And I know it's only been a week. Have any of y'all done any experimentation with these different ways of handling these issues? And I recognize that the answer might be no, just because, even if your willingness is high, because of the nature of how often or not these things come up. But I'll open the floor for any commentary about the use of these strategies that might have happened in the last week.
Well, I feel like I had an opportunity that I missed. I don't talk to most of my family, so I don't really have that opportunity other than just like random people on Facebook. But there was an interaction I witnessed in a grocery store. I kind of came late into the situation, and I didn't really understand fully what was going on. But I realized afterward that it would have been a really great opportunity for me to use some of the things that I had learned.
What happened?
Well, I was at the grocery store, and I was at the meat counter, and there was a customer who was Black and was interacting with one of the butchers, and I didn't hear, apparently there was something that the customer said that really upset the guy behind the counter. I think he corrected him on his order, and I didn't hear that part of the conversation. I didn't hear anything that had happened, but the butcher was so rude to him, and in his tone, and I listened, and I should have at that moment, I feel like I should have said something in that moment, but I wasn't really sure what was going on. And later, after I thought about it, I did go back to the grocery store, and I talked to one of the managers about what I'd experienced, because I believe that customer went and probably talked to management too, and so I wanted to make sure that there was a second witness to that incident. Yep. So it's not exactly a success story for me, but I think a large part of my challenge right now is just being aware, like seeing what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's happening a little bit. I'm much more, I don't know if much more is maybe a little too generous, but I'm trying to be much more aware of what's going on around me, and looking for instances where I can be an ally, I guess.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so the workshop, so is it fair to say that the workshop sort of pushed your attention on that, pushed the creator attention on that? Is that part of what you're saying? To be that from an awareness standpoint?
I think we lost her, David.
I think we did. Okay. So Angela, when I asked Ingrid opportunities to use it, you were about to say something? What were you going to say?
I guess I was going to say that what I started to do right away after the workshop was think about how I could influence the people I know that are already advocates in school. For instance, I have a friend who is a white teacher who teaches mixed, it's all women's college or high school. And so I told her about this workshop and explained my own sister who is resistant to the discussion. And I explained it in a way that I feel like it made me think about what we're up against in ourselves, because my particular sister doesn't have much exposure to African Americans, and she probably isn't overtly racist, but is subvertly racist in that she doesn't really advocate for inclusion. And so she would be really against public actions. As soon as she sees that people are on the streets advocating against police action, she says, well, why don't they think about doing things more constructively? So I ended up explaining to others that I had to go back to my own background and say, oh, where have I felt that way? Or where have I been concerned about making too much noise and just, following what's expected is to work hard. And so I could get along the side of my sister who just doesn't have the same life experience. She didn't go to college, and she's worked as a nursing assistant. And so she has a little less exposure maybe to people who are asking these questions. So that's the biggest thing I've done, is just try to explain it to people that are already anti-racist activists that are like, well, this is a good method. But I said, it pushes me because I don't want to talk to my sister. I think she doesn't have any interest. But at the same time, if I don't connect to her around it, then I've kind of walled off a whole bunch of people in my family and in my life. So I guess that's the biggest thing, is the reflect. And then just telling people at my church that have a very multicultural church, hey, there's this great new method. I'm really interested in learning how to be good at this. I'm tired of, just turning off when my relatives or other people are saying racist things, and I want to practice with you. And we're in this little bubble called Portland.
So you actually said you want to practice with them?
Yeah. I said, why not? How am I going to get this work done all by myself? I have to find my allies that are already working in other contexts, and they're by themselves. A lot of times they feel they're by themselves. They might have the equity manager at their school or that one HR person who gets it, but they're on their own. And I said, we don't have to be on our own. We need to use a method, though, because, if we don't use a method, then we're just sort of shooting from the hip.
So that is fabulous that you had those conversations. So I'm assuming you didn't actually have a practice session, or did you?
I didn't go that far.
But even just to recruit people for that, that is fantastic.
Okay. That's my first step. That's easier for me than going to my sister.
No. Well, and I think I said that in the workshop, that the good news about this approach to having conversation is you can have this with somebody who is not a skeptic. As you're practicing your stories and practicing your management of the conversation this way, the opportunities to practice are all around.
Okay. Yeah.
That's great.
I think that's good to hear. And I don't know. I'm on a kind of a housing bond group, just started this past week, and it's mostly people of color, and there's a few white allies. So I'm kind of curious about this kind of a method, working with people that are already dealing with racism on a daily basis because they're people of color.
Right.
And whether or not introducing something like this is a benefit or just a benefit for the white allies. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, I would say this. you can certainly work on your expand story, right? Because
Okay.
working on your connect story is basically going to be basically telling people, let me tell you a story about when racism doesn't matter. And I'm not sure that your people of color want to spend time.
Right. They don't want to hear that,
Talk
right?
about that.
They're tired of that, yeah.
but on some level, I mean, at the next layers of this project, there will be a focus on like refining your story. Storytelling is its own art, right? And so, you know, as I said before, you want to have the 45-second version of a story and a 3-minute version, so you can adapt as necessary. So certainly, refining your story about here's what happened to me, refining your connect story, which will resonate with your resonate with people of color, is a useful thing to practice, because you know it's all about, you know, it's a tool. You haven't probably thought about the stories you have as tools to sharpen your use of them, and you can do that, you know, and you can do it, and you can even ask for feedback about it, right? I mean, ultimately, I believe that people of color need to push white allies to do this kind of work. That's number one. Number two is that there's a whole set of discourse that might need to happen where people of color are telling stories from their own experience of racism for the express purpose of helping allies have stories in their pocket, right? So one of the things that you might do after, you know, explaining to your Black comrades, okay, I took this course. One of the things they tell me to do is to break out my own stories. I'm gonna tell you the story, and you give me some feedback on how well how compelling it was.
Mm-hmm. So is there separate stories for each, David? Like, do you have an R for?
Say it again.
Do you have a separate story?
Yeah, here's my feeling about that.
Another for ask, another for connect, another for expand, or
no, it's really two stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
For every issue, you want a story that is a connect story to a skeptic, basically saying within the realm of that issue, I can tell you I can tell you somebody's personal experience, better if it's yours, that shows that racism isn't the only thing that matters. And then I'm also going to tell you a personal story, hopefully yours, but maybe not, that racism sometimes matters. Now, that's true for law enforcement. That's true for people, economic opportunity, people of color cause their own problems. That's true for nobody's racist anymore. That's true for unearned racial advantage. So we can go down the list, right? So what I'm saying is that it's two stories per issue, or at least, right? And as I'm saying, you might not want to practice your connect story with your folk of color, but you might practice your expand story. And what I'm saying is that if you're engaging in somebody in a conversation about this and they become curious, that conversation could turn into, well, you know, part of what we're encouraged to do is to accumulate other people's stories, because and sometimes tell them. So if, you know, again, you got to make decisions about how well you know them and whether this would be perceived as weird, but it's not inconceivable that depending on your relationship with them, you might say, you know, on X, you know, that might evolve into them telling you a story about what happened to them that you take notes on and use, and that becomes part of your arsenal. That's what I'm saying.
Right. So this kind of makes me think, I don't want to dominate all this either conversation, but I'm part of this Metropolitan Alliance for Common Good in Portland, and we try to do relational storytelling in order to do community organizing. So we're always listening to someone's story, but we usually then say, would you mind sharing that story of affordable housing need in front of this politician and the rest of our members to ask for a change in public policy? So we usually honor stories and empower people that don't usually get their story heard. So I'm used to doing that, but I'm not used to telling my own connection unless I'm trying to get affordable housing bond passed and saying, hey, I've heard stories, or the people I work with. So I just don't want to use people's story unless I have relationship I guess, and permission to connect it to what they want, what I
would
want.
always think that you might ask them, like if somebody does
Yeah.
it publicly and you're going to use it for a different purpose, you might ask them, do they feel comfortable with that? And they will likely say yes, since they told it publicly. But I think it's reasonable to ask them, and you might, So I think that's not unreasonable. People want racism to end, so they're probably, if they're telling a story publicly, they're probably not gonna mind if you tell it to your friend.
Right. Yeah, okay. So, but you're kind of also talking specifically about some issues, and I would love to have a list of like, what are the key issues that I need to reflect on? Police brutality, economic advantage. Have I really fully gotten it with my limited life experience? And if you have a list like that, that makes me.
Well, I mean, okay, got it. So the list is ever expanding as my project grows. But I can tell you off the top of my head is there's the issue of race and police. There's no reason for people to trip about police because everybody treats you fine. Then and some of them they're based on like messed up statements that people make, right? Remember I asked for people for those because I'm trying to expand the project, right? But I know so far, people of color cause economic problems. Everybody knows you get treated well by the police. There's no such thing as white privilege or racial advantage. Racism, slavery and Jim Crow were a long time ago. So stop talking about it. Nobody's racist anymore. I think that's 6, right? And the seventh one, a seventh one might be, we really need to stop immigration because all those people are taking over our country. And the eighth one might be those athletes need to stop protesting and just be grateful they got an opportunity.
Okay, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, that's good. You hit on a few that I hadn't thought of. Thank you.
Sure. So, so Ingrid, you got cut off before. Glad you're back. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you were in the process of finishing telling us about the encounter. Well, maybe you finished within the story. Did you finish that? Did you finish telling us about that?
It's not through clearly. Can you?
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. Can you
look
repeat
fantastic.
that?
I said, when you got cut off before,
Are you still? Uh-huh.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can now.
Okay. Yeah, I keep getting the message your connection is unstable.
Yeah, sometimes it helps to cut.
There we go. Yeah, I think I must have a problem with my router or my internet. I'm going to move to someplace else in my house to see if that makes a difference.
You also might want to cut your video just for a little bit. That tends to help sometimes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Ingrid,
Right.
you can cut the video. You were tending toward invisibility anyway, so
yes.
That's perfectly fine. So what I was asking was whether you finished telling us about the grocery store incident.
Well, I guess the only other thing I would say is I spent a couple of days thinking about that. And again, my tendency is immediately to attack when I guess when I feel anything. I'm kind of an angry person. So I think if I had acted in that moment and before I attended your class, I think my first reaction would have been to really attack that guy, the employee. Whereas I went away and I thought about it, and I tend to try to analyze my actions and try to figure out how I could do better. I try to, what I do next time kind of thing. And I thought, again, one of the most important things I feel like I pulled from your workshop was the importance of pulling the person into your community before you start to discuss with them. And so I was thinking to myself, okay, rather than just attacking that guy and saying, you shouldn't be doing that. What are you doing? Why are you so rude? But and again, I'm not 100% sure I know how to do that. It's going to be the experimentation you talked about. But I feel like the first step for me in that instance would have been somehow to pull him into my community before I really addressed the root issue there that I was seeing. But again, that is a huge challenge for me, because my first inclination is just to go from 0 to 100 and just be mad and let him have it.
Right, and you have to. I got it, and it's really great that you recognize your own tendencies on that. And of course, these things are all highly varied by context, right? You're in a grocery store, some guy. It's one thing to be. It's one kind of problem or issue to blast somebody in the grocery store for being rude. You can talk the pros and cons of that. It's another thing to do that with a family member who you still might want to go to 100
Yeah,
miles.
I might have a relationship with that I would want to preserve.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And right, and there's also I gave you all the ladder of retorts, right? Did I give you all the ladder of retorts?
No,
I don't remember.
nope.
Yeah, I don't remember that. But there was a lot of information, so.
Anyway.
Is it on your website? Do you have a website?
That's what I'm at. And Gozai is my web manager, and of course, why would I expect he would remember everything on that website? That's stupid, David. So let me look at it really quickly. I
don't think the ladder of retorts is on there. You've got 4 worksheets in the Holiday Survive and Thrive Guide, but not the ladder of retorts.
Right, but it's not. Yes, it is not. It's not in the Holiday Survive and Thrive Guide. It'd be in another background toolkit materials. Actually, let's see. Okay, well, yes, it's not there, right? So I will put that up. If you go to, I'll put it up. Well, it goes up. I put it up. But if you're honest about that, but it's terrible. I got to learn these things. So, but all I was going to say was that there's one of the things I put together was a ladder of retorts that are, all the way from, oh, I didn't hear could you repeat that? I didn't hear what you said, like feigned deafness.
Yeah,
All the way to, in a workplace setting, HR is going to hear about this conversation, right? So there's different, even in the realm of nonviolent communication, there are levels of aggressiveness, right?
Yeah.
So, in a situation where you're in a store, you might be more in the retort mode than in the dialogic mode, right?
Yeah.
But I still think that what you're pointing out is the need to sort of center oneself and to make choices. To make choices is still, that's a critical thing anyway. So I'll put that up, or the team will put that up. And so, but I basically want to give you kudos for doing something in that situation. That's fantastic. That's great.
Just something, huh?
Well, I mean,
the other thing that I found really helpful about what I learned at your conference was really like what you were just saying, being intentional, because again, my tendency is to punch back, and that's very self-serving, I think. And I really need to, if I want to make progress, you pointed out, then you need to be much more intentional about how you engage people, and it can't just be an emotional reaction. And so again, that's a deeper issue for me that's a personal issue I have to work on myself, in addition to just educating myself about, what's going on in the world and opening my eyes, being woke.
Got you. So I want to shift the conversation to, remember I played that video, that clip last week. You remember that?
Yeah. Are those on your website too? If we want to show them to people or something, are they?
I do not have the shame thing up as a. I mean, I have a lot of videos up. I don't have one about the shame one. I don't have it up yet.
Okay.
No,
Did you show us a shame video? Did you?
What's that?
I'm sorry. Did we actually do a shame video?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a clip. There was a clip from a previous meeting. Everybody was wearing orange and black. And
Okay, I remember.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I wanted to do is to just visit this question of, I don't know how the conversation went in your small group, but I have a hunch that this shame thing is something I might need to further understand. And so I want to just open the floor for the three of y'all to reflect on. Well, I mean, I could show the video, but you got limited. You know, it's like 3 minutes, but it's already 5:10 or so. If y'all remember it, I don't need to show it again. Although if you want me to play it again, I can do it. But the issue really is there a role that as you think about how you show up as an ally and how you show up, particularly around dealing with other people who are racism skeptics, is that issue of shame something that affects you subtly or overtly?
We didn't get to talk about that at my table, and I really wanted to talk about that because I feel really ashamed that I'm almost 50 and I'm just realizing that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. So for me, I relate to what that gal said in your video, but I use it sort of as a stick to beat myself with. You know, to remind myself that this isn't something I can do like once a month and then put it away until it's convenient or I feel like it. It's something that I have to think about like literally on an everyday basis, that this isn't something that, I mean, that's what I'm using it for, is I'm using it to really
interesting. So it can be a motivator.
Well, that's what it is for me, because otherwise I would just shut down.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. Robin and Angela, y'all want to add anything to that?
Well, I do. I actually think it bears quite a bit of exploration. I think it is an animating factor in how white people show up in this work in general. And I actually think quite a bit more attention to it could be paid. You know, the problem is time. You know, what do you give up in order to have the conversation? But I think our personal orientation to this work really matters a lot, and it's going to be very individual to the person. But that dichotomy between blame versus responsibility, I think, is an important pre-conversation to then how you show up for the intervention work that you do. And it's something that we can talk about tomorrow when you and I and Francis talk again, but I actually think it's a really important concept. And I was glad to see that you introduced it, but it needed a little bit more, I think, guidance.
Right. Yeah, that's part of what I want to kind of talk to some people about it to get clearer on how to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think your instincts are right on that it really is an important thing to bring into the conversation, though.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, I'm a Roman Catholic, so we're really into guilt. But and guilt is actually one, you know, you get what is there 4 emotions that are yourself conscious of: embarrassment, guilt, pride, and shame. And so of all those 4, guilt is my go-to, and it makes me act. It makes me want to go and take some action, and I want to be effective. So this tool is really exciting for me because it's like, okay, I do feel really guilty, but I feel like I'm absolved from my guilt when I act with relationships with other people, and I believe in a God that's loving and just. So that helps me, right? So it's a religious or spiritual connection for me. But I think there's a desire for white women, particularly because of Brene Brown, who's this person who's psychologist. You know, she's kind of all about feel worthy. Yeah, she's all about shame. So she's trying to help people use their shame, I guess, or heal from their shame so they're more effective. So I'm interested in seeing what happens with gentrification, because that's part of what my reality of where I live in Portland, and my own neighborhood is like a original African-American neighborhood that is, I just watched it be gentrified. And I could say I'm the problem, I'm a gentrifier, but I've been an activist, and that activist with other people has helped me kind of take my shame for being white and choosing to live here and not being conscious of, you know, I had to live somewhere. Part of the problem is everybody's got to find a house, and you feel this pressure that I got to find a place. And then you walk in and you're the only white person on the block, and then 20 years later, you know, there's only one black person on the block. So it's not totally my fault, but I'm trying to be more effective at talking to all the urban planners in Portland who thought they were doing the right thing by getting a train coming in and all this benefit. Well, without affordable housing, without jobs, you know, then
Right.
you got that problem in Portland. And there's a video called Losing Alberta that it'd be great to see you watch sometime. It's some students, African-American students from a high school that did a video called Losing Alberta, because that's a neighborhood where it's totally gentrified. And they're really connecting it to this train and the gentrification that's related to livability. And so it's like, I'm looking at that going, I'm ashamed that I'm part of that. And yet I feel like, well, that's not really effective to just stay in that shame. Because I'm not a bad person. I guess that's what shame is. Shame is the belief that you are tainted and that you cannot be recovered as a good person. And I just try not to stay there when I feel that way.
Right, but you also said, so let me feed it back to y'all.
Okay.
Both you and Ingrid basically said that some sense of, and I know guilt and shame are different, but some sense of that continuum can be motivating for the work. Now, you know, I got to think about, my first reaction is, I ain't got no problem with that. Right? Whatever, that's great. That's my first reaction. I got to think about that. But what the one thing the video said was that it also affects how she actually engages people, and it puts her to engage people in ways that are not as productive, that are more attacking and confronting, and not like it's a what's wrong with you, as opposed to, girl, please, I know what you're talking about. But I have been there. I used to think like that, a much more engaging thing, right? So my question would be to both of y'all, and this distinction between motivation and technique is an important thing for me to understand around this. But I just want to go back to the question of, do you think that it sometimes affects not just that you want to do the work, but how you do it in some way or another?
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't want to connect with people that are from my family of origin that are racist, because I'm afraid as a woman, and I have a couple of brothers, and I'm just afraid. You know, if I were to confront them or to attach, it's attached to my family. So,
Angela, I can't. I missed. Did anybody else hear what she said? I missed that. You said you're afraid. You have a couple of brothers, then you kind of cut out. Say that again. Can you say that again?
Okay. Yeah, I have family members, 2 brothers, and one of them, I just feel like he would not. I'm afraid to confront him and any racism he has, just because physically he, you know, kind of dominated my life. And so I think that if there's any real fear, I'm ashamed of him. I wouldn't want to bring him to my friend's party or meet any of my friends that are gay or lesbian or black, just because of what I know of him. And so I think there's real shame in being from a family where there's that. And you just said, and when you told us that 55% of people don't believe racism exists, I was like, hallelujah, to know that it's that high. I mean, that's not good, but it's good to know that it's so widespread that it's not just my family,
Right.
or it's not just my uncle I'm ashamed of. It's just a fear of not being able to engage, choosing the wrong people or choosing the wrong moment. So I guess we have to do that, be strategic with our own personal relations. And I'm ashamed, I guess I'm just ashamed that there's a lot of people in Portland that think that having great bike lanes is a solution to social justice. And so they think that somehow, you know, we can just bike into a better world and it's all going to be white all right. And I don't know how to confront that, or, you know,
Right.
I don't know if I'm ashamed or if I'm just like confounded about
Right.
how easy it is to ignore race if
Right.
you have a certain lifestyle in this town.
Ingrid,
So-
did you want to? Thank you so much for that, Angela. Ingrid, did you want to comment on that how shame might affect not that you do the work, but how you do this kind of persuasive work?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that. I'm trying to kind of organize them in my head. I'm going to start talking, and I'm not sure if it's going to make much sense, but I'm going to try to kind of talk my way through it.
Okay.
My first inclination was to say, no, it doesn't really affect how I do my work. But I rethought that, because one of my, I guess one of the thoughts I had is I don't, you know, the idea of pulling somebody into your community, my first instinct isn't to do that with somebody who makes a racist comment. My first instinct is to alienate them and to create a distance, because I don't want to be anything like them. And I think some of that comes from, you know, it was an eye-opening thing for me to realize that, you know, a racist isn't somebody who's just not nice. You know, it's like, I thought, well, I'm not a racist because I don't have these thoughts, but it's a whole system. And so for me to acknowledge that, okay, so it's more than just not being nice. I've always in the past thought it was just like not being nice. So I'm not going to have anything to do with that person. They don't share values with me. I don't want them in my community. I don't want anything to do with that person. And then I've got relatives who, they post things on Facebook that make me very uncomfortable and really embarrassed. Like Angela was saying, I would not want my friends to see those things. I'm embarrassed to be related to those people. And yet at the same time, these are people I do care about. And I wouldn't say they're bad people. I mean, they're my family. So for me, they're not bad people, but obviously there's something there that's for me is really embarrassing and shameful in what they're saying. And I think that, I mean, I'm trying to think through, wrestle with that discrepancy, because I grew up thinking the world was very black and white, if you can excuse my expression, but I'm trying to figure out all the shades of gray. And like I said, I'm very late to this wrestling kind of process. And so I'm struggling with, okay, so how can I find something, like you had asked us in our, I think there was a point where you asked us to think of somebody we knew, something they had said, and then you asked us to find something nice or to say something positive about that person. Mm-hmm. And, you know, honestly, my first inclination is just to just say, this person has no redeeming qualities at all. Again, I totally want to other them. I don't want anything to do with them. And that for me is, I would think that's part of my own sense of shame for my family members too, is I'm trying to deal with that. How do I reconcile these discrepancies that that I'm growing up with, that I'm trying to outgrow? I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a component there that I'm thinking through.
Right. Let me. I got it. I really appreciate that. So let me see if I can try to make that a capsule. So one of the things that you basically said was, before you said that the shame thing can be a motivator to stay doing the work, but
Yes.
what you just said was that there's certain people who you might need to do the work with, who the shame is so bad you want to disconnect from them altogether, right? And including family members, etc., or minimize your interaction, because now that you have come a certain direction, have certain realizations, you want to disassociate from people who don't have that yet, including people in your family. And that might mean there's certain people you don't do this work with because of that whole shame thing. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, I you know me better than I know myself, I think.
Right. Well, that's helpful to think about. I need to figure out how to raise that in the group setting. Because
Oh, David, I got some ideas. I got lots of ideas.
Okay.
I bet Ngoza does too, but we can talk about it tomorrow. I mean, at the end of the day, it's this sort of self-work that we need to do first in order to be more effective as allies.
Yeah.
We often get short shrift when we try to cut the strategy of it all. And just based on work that I've done.
And I think that for
Oh, go ahead, Nicholas.
Robin, I would add that I would just say to the white allies on the call, Black folks feel shame, and it impacts how we do the work as well. So it's not universally. We all feel it, although it expresses itself differently. So there are lots of times when I'm like, I can't speak up in this conversation because I haven't been doing the work. I've been ignoring it, or I should be tougher in these situations. And there's definitely a reaction. There's definitely a reaction there. Like, I'm not at every rally, so can I really say anything to anybody about this? And that shame presents itself in a lot of ways to a lot of different groups. So it's really healthy that you're recognizing it. That's an important step.
Yeah.
And Ngozai is a reverend, so she's from a profession that has that's helping people process shame, also sometimes helping them feel it.
Yes, all according to their worthiness as creatures of God. I'm just kidding.
Can I add one other thing in talking about shame? One of the things that that I've thought about in the past that's helped me is, I think that I saw a picture once of a Japanese, like a vessel of some sort. And it had been cracked and re-put together with gold. And the comment was that was considered very beautiful in Japanese culture. You don't hide those defects or your cracks. They make you more beautiful. And so I've thought about that in my own struggles with, am I worthy and am I doing enough? Just to realize that this is part of the process. And I think we've established that it's going to be uncomfortable and maybe embarrassing and painful, but it's going to make us more beautiful in the end, I guess. We've got to accept that about ourselves, I guess, that we are fractured.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And there's a Japanese word from that, and
yeah, it starts with a K.
There's a concept.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but somebody wrote the book called Anti-Fragile, and it talks about how the opposite of fragility is not actually strength, but an ability to become stronger through the breaks. And so that nestles nicely in with this idea.
Yeah, I have one more thought on shame.
Sure.
So isn't part of shame is like that you have beauty that you shouldn't be seen as beautiful? And I think there might be something in that.
Say more about that.
Well, so I think it comes from my feminism a little bit, that if you're a woman and you're wearing a short skirt and you are pretty, it's used against you when somebody makes a comment or tries to minimize you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're white and you feel powerful at a meeting, but you're with people of color and you don't want to overshadow other people's, beauty and insight, that's where I feel like I need to be quiet and step back. And I don't know if that's shame or if it's more like respect for how much power a white person ends up having unfairly when you speak.
Right.
So not sure I'm just trying to understand, like, is shame about not having a gift of being able to speak your truth or using it at the wrong time? And that's all I know.
Right, I got it. So let me just, on the one hand, this project is trying to stay in its lane, but there's a highway that this is lane on a really wide highway, right?
Yes.
So, I don't want to cut things off abruptly, but I just want to clarify that given that this project is focused on helping and in particular, other white people who don't think racism is real. So in that context, I would say there's no doubt to me, but not unlike what Ngozi said, is that the issue of shame around all this is going to affect white allies in a multiplicity of ways, given the multiplicity of things that allies need to be doing or do. In particular, my focus is on not that issue you talked about, which matters, but something else that matters, which is interactions with other white folk. So I'm just saying, I certainly understand that issues around shame and validity and my perception of my own validity, other people's perception of my validity, everything else is going to be affected by that and in the complicated relationship between white allies and people of color. So that I imagine that's true. Like I said, I'm going to spend more energy on what is the role that shame plays in, as y'all articulated, on the work of dealing with skeptics, right? And y'all have helped me think that through more, and I'm looking forward to thinking that more and getting Robin's feedback at a more extended time about how, in a workshop setting or in the project in general, how I might tee that up in an appropriate manner and give enough guidance on that. So I really thank y'all for that.